All right, everybody. Jeff Dalton from Ask the CMMI Appraiser, and I have Mr. Ron Lear. Ron's not only the chief architect of the CMMI Institute, but he is the most watched interviewee I've ever had on Ask the CMMI Appraiser. So I guess people like you, Ron.
Ah, shucks.
Yeah, right. I think it's because you have a lot of really good information to share. And right before we started our call today and our prep, Ron was talking a little bit about what's going on with CMMI in the world, and why don't you share that with us?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks for having me back. It's always good to have a chat with you and your vast audience of listeners all over the world.
My mother likes you anyway.
Yeah. So let's see. We got a lot of exciting things going on with CMMI. Externally, let's talk about a few things. So one is, I think if you all saw the partner webinar and a couple other communications have gone out, all of our numbers, leading indicator numbers, adoption numbers are kind of at an all-time high. We have appraisals up. The good news and bad news on appraisals, appraisal numbers are up, which means that the queue to get them processed is getting longer. And I think a lot of you are experiencing some of that pain, as are we. And we're working very hard to address that. But classes are up. All-time high. We opened up the CMMI Lead Appraiser class again, starting in July. The instructor class will start in August, and we sold out 4 Lead Appraiser classes within 3 days.
Wow!
And it looks like we have 2 other full classes we can do by the end of the year. So that's a cohort of 60 new Lead Appraisers, which is just great news from my perspective. The other great news about that, and I can say this because I have this color of hair here, but I'm very glad to see that we're getting a lot of, I'll say, less seasoned people than you and I with our gray hair and gray beards, Jeff, but seeing a lot of, new people coming into industry first time. It's either their first or second job, second or third job type thing versus it's the end of their career. And they're all fairly high tech when they come in and stuff. So there's a lot of really good news there. We're seeing adoption up pretty much across the globe. The biggest challenge I think we've got right now, or I'll say we have to figure out a strategy for this, is that the Chinese Software Association just put out a Chinese software maturity model that looks suspiciously like the CMMI.
Go figure.
And we are looking into that, shall we say, from a lot of different angles, including how do we want to, what's our strategy overall from an Isaka perspective, but also strategy with CMMI specifically. And I'd certainly welcome all the inputs from the partners and from our lead appraisers and other community, your audience, to kind of weigh in and help us to steer the ship in the right direction on that front, because as you know, we have a lot of growth in China, a lot of our revenues coming in from China and stuff, but up until recently, we were seeing fairly flat growth on CMMI in other countries. That's actually starting to turn again. So the numbers are actually starting to go up a little bit. 2019 is an example, and I know that's 2 years ago, but that was the first year we had CMMI appraisals. It was India that was the first country leading adoption there, which was great to see. US, Mexico, and China followed. So that was all good to see that. And we're seeing increased interest again from Europe.
Good.
So across the board, I think CMMI is getting really noticed. And that's by not just what we're doing from the CMMI perspective, but it's what organizations are challenged with. So last week, I think many of you are aware, I actually had an opportunity to sit in on a fireside chat with about 200 to 300 Googlers. They're basically in the project management, program management office. And as I understood, as the way they explained it to me, Google has grown up through these project and product specific teams, and then they kind of build stuff around that. And what they keep running into challenges are, see if you stop me here, Jeff, if you've not heard any of these things, hard to scale our Agile projects, don't have real involvement from senior management. Who should own this stuff? Why do we care about measuring performance? I mean, it was probably 10 questions that were dead on in the sweet spot of CMMI.
Wow.
So I think we're going to have more dialogue with them and companies like them. I have a standing invitation as soon as the campus opens up to go do something similar with a little company called Apple. So,
it's funny how they just rediscover the basics,
right,
after all these years, and we'll finally be able to answer the question: does Google and Apple use CMMI?
Right.
That's good. Congratulations. That's great news. And I have noticed that in the last 6 months or so that Isaka has really been stepping up for the partners a lot more, especially with this. I can't remember the word for it, but partner representative or counselor or whatever the term is.
Account manager, right?
Account manager. And the account managers we've been interacting with have been fantastic. So that's
great.
It's good that people are starting to look at this as a serious thing. And
let me pile on that for just a second and answer to your question still. And that's, I was talking externally before. Internally, we are working. We've got new resources on the IT team to help us actually burn down the CAS and the course management system backlog. We all know there are pain points there. We're addressing those. The CEC is setting up and training people. We've got additional staff there. They've been working a lot closer with the program.
Yeah.
We're seeing our support tickets, that queue go way down. So right now, the biggest, I'll say, pain point with most of our partners and lead appraisers is that appraisal queue. And Jeff Terrell and team actually are getting more resources for that as well. And we're training some people up there. So I think you're going to start seeing things get better. I'm seeing them incrementally get better. I think if you were to stop looking and say, come back in 2-3 months, you're going to see something pretty different.
Yeah, we've noticed it improving too. And I think part of that is this tiered program that you've put in place for, sort of the more high volume appraisal companies, and Broadsword, believe it or not, for our size, I was surprised to hear it was one of them. And going to be a lot more now that we've got another lead appraiser coming in. We've seen, increased performance from the quality team, in terms of the timing of closing appraisals. Just in the last 2 months, it's really gotten quite a bit better.
Well, I'm going to have them record it, but I've actually heard from 2 of our lead appraisers last week who actually called me to tell me something positive about CAS. And they basically both said, look, when we first started using CAS, it was a total pain in the you-know-what.
Yeah.
But after several appraisals, you start getting through. It actually is starting to help me plan better as an appraiser because it catches me on stuff that I might. Those are their words, not ours. So I was really happy to hear that.
That is nice. The planning in CAS has become a lot nicer, and it's a lot easier than planning in a Word document and then typing it all in after the fact kind of stuff. And so yeah, I think ultimately it'll be a good thing once all the bugs get worked out of it.
We also have our world's first sustainment appraisal being scheduled.
Very cool.
So yeah, lots going on.
Yeah, that's exciting. So speaking of stuff that's going on, I have, every time you and I talk, I take samples of some of the most common questions I'm getting on the blog, and you do such a good job of answering them. So I want to start with one of them, and this has to do with virtual delivery. So I know that's something that you're passionate about, and I am, and the EVSD is great, and we use it every day at Broadsword. We're big fans of it. There was a certification process that happened for some lead appraisers a couple of months back, maybe in January. I remember taking a class and an exam, I guess. And many of us, because of COVID, were authorized to do virtual training and virtual appraisal. So some confusion about that, because some people are saying, I thought that was in perpetuity, and some people are saying, no, there's a provisional period or some kind of deadline around it. What's the story on that?
Yeah, and first and foremost, we could have done a better job there probably communicating some of that. As all of you know, COVID-19 pandemic was very fluid, and we were trying to keep up, maintain the integrity of CMMI products, appraisals, and everything else. Yeah. All that said and done, let me just clear the air now. So first and foremost, if anyone's coming new into the pipeline, this is the simplest piece of this. We are requiring them as a prerequisite for the lead appraiser class. There's some pre-course work you have to do. And one of them is to take the EVSD course and pass that and get through, so that basically they'll become virtually certified as part of their regular path.
Okay.
For everybody else, there was a period to have people sign up to get through and get their certifications. You do have to have the certification to do virtual appraisals, but we did update. So on June 3rd, we pushed out an emergency patch release of the MDD. Prior to that, we had pushed out a release that we gathered from a lot of people, and I would encourage you all to go download it. Look at Appendix A. We put in some real examples and stuff in there, but in CAS now, and in the MDD, we've got it aligned for conducting virtual appraisals. So essentially, virtual appraisals, and we haven't announced this publicly yet. It's got to go out as an official communication. So you're hearing it first with the caveat, the date itself may change. The last deadline I believe we had was until something like the end of August that the provisional period was going to end. Once we put out this update to the MDD, the need for the provisional period went away. By that, I mean the MDD now is built and CAS is getting caught up to it to support 100% virtual appraisals now and forever when the conditions of Appendix A apply or don't apply. So as long as you follow those regulations or the requirements in Appendix A to cover it, you're good to go. You'll see options in CAS. It's right about when you put in, I think it's right after you put in the business and appraisal objectives, or right before that step. It'll ask, is this a virtual appraisal? And it'll ask a handful of questions to go along with that. So at this point, we've got to go out and make an announcement to say, yay, verily, since the MDD has been now updated to accommodate this, all provisional periods are now lifted, and you can just conduct an appraisal either virtually or non-virtually. You have to have the certification as a lead appraiser to do it virtually.
Can you give us one or two use cases of what would qualify for virtual and maybe something that wouldn't qualify for virtual? Is that possible?
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you asked that question, because we did exactly that in Appendix A with this update. We added a handful of use cases and examples. So for example, I'll give you one that's not, it's pretty simple. And that is, if you're looking at CMMI for security, I'm going to shameless huckstering of our new content. If you're doing CMMI for security and you have to look at someone's physical security, you have to be on site at least part of the time to do that. It's like just kind of it's the nature of the work, right? So in that case, could you do a virtual 100% virtual appraisal? And the answer would be no, because not if you're looking at physical security, right? All right, so that's a simple one. Let's go with a little bit more complicated one. What if I'm a mega corporation and I've got 10 sites and I'm going to pull a project from each one of those sites? I don't want to send an organization traveling from each of the sites to have to do an appraisal. So I'd like to run a central virtual appraisal, and I want to do it incorporating each of those sites. Do I have the technology to do so? Do I have the plan, the risk behind it to do so? Do I have a backup and contingency plan? Do I have a way to verify all the people? And one of the issues that came up with this, so this is a quick side note, is particularly in Europe but elsewhere, the whole thing around privacy is becoming an issue, right? And when we have our classes, like when we have our CMMI appraisals, lead appraisers and appraisal teams actually have to verify identity. They have to know who they're talking to, that they're part of that organization. And we've had a couple of people complain saying, well, my instructor said, everybody flash your ID up on screen at the same time, and I'll just verify your identity. And then, of course, they're going, well, if someone's going to take a screenshot of my photo ID, then they're going to get all my personal information.
That's right.
So, quick, simple workaround. Take every individual in a course at some point before the class starts, individually go into a breakout room and say, let me see your ID. Then you've got control over it. It's only the instructor seeing it for requirements that we have to have in both the method and our courses. So that in that example with the 10 sites with multiple things, they have all the pieces in place. Can a virtual appraisal be done for them? Sure, it can. Yeah.
So just to clarify on the training use case, you were talking about the appraisal team training class, not the foundations class, right?
I'm talking about actually both, right? And you guys need to, when you do your roster, that's how typically you're verifying identities, right? So once you have it in your roster, you're good to go. But yeah, for appraisal team training, for appraisal participants, if you look in Appendix A, you've got to verify, is the person I'm talking to on the other end of the camera the person doing the role in that organization, or is it someone that they hired from outside to, play that? I just play a software developer on TV, right? It's just that kind of thing. We want to know We want lead appraisers to have the authority of the MDD behind them to say, I got to verify identities of my ATMs and my appraisal participants.
Seems like a good practice addition for EVSD, verification of who you are.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely language in there on it, but we built it in very specifically. It was a great question we had from some previous feedback to say, I don't know what do you mean by a virtual face-to-face interview? And it's like, well, a virtual face-to-face interview is everything except being present.
Right.
We're having
one now, right?
touch the person. Yeah, if you need to be able to look them in the eye, you need to be able to hear their voice. You need to be able to watch their body language. Because remember, our appraisals aren't just about verbal communication, it's the nonverbal stuff too.
It's amazing how much of it's nonverbal, actually. Most people don't realize that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You see what people are being, when they're trying to hide something or trying to fabricate something. And
I can tell you there's been many times I've been in appraisals where a senior manager says something and I'm not watching them. I'm actually watching the tech leads and stuff. And you'd be surprised what a good metric rolling their eyes is.
Yeah, and there's certain countries, I won't say which ones, where the manager sits in the corner and nods one way or the other before the person answers the question, and they look to their manager before they answer any questions. So all that kind of stuff is good. I think those are a really good addition. Does this also apply to training classes? Will instructors be permitted to continue, say, foundations and?
Yeah, same rules apply, same certification. So once they have the certification, you'll be able to do virtual. Any class that's designed for either VILT or ILT can be done. We are working on, I don't have a specific date for you, but we're working on doing some updates to the foundations, building courses and stuff with some more, some of this stuff built into it. We also need to include security and safety in those courses too. So that's an update we have planned for later this year.
Yeah, we're getting really good feedback from our students in the virtual training that they really like it that way. Now we do lots of virtual activities and stuff. Maybe not everybody does, but I think you talked about classes being up. That's been our experience too. I think it's easier to sign up and go to training virtually than it is than if you have to travel to Reston or travel to DC or something like that. So it's just a lot easier to get someone in training if it's virtual.
Yeah, Ben, I think what you talked about with your activities, to me, that's the key. Having now taught a couple of courses, I just taught our applying course a couple of weeks ago. The key is engagement. You've got to keep people engaged. And that's not just true in courses. It was true when you were doing them in person, but it was easier to do that when you were in person because you could get them doing things physically, moving tables and chairs and getting up and down and doing this. But when you got people sitting with their, tail end, sitting in a chair for 4 or 5 hours straight, you got to do something to really keep them engaged.
Yeah.
The more you do that, the more the numbers go up is what we've been seeing. When people come back saying, I was really engaged, I really, it gives you opportunity. It also gives us better, I think, flexible scheduling too, capability, right? You could schedule what was a 3-4 day class instead of having it 3 consecutive days, spread it out over 5 or 6
Yeah, I
days.
actually did a class for an Indian company, and it was 5 nights from 9 p.m. to like 2 in the morning, 5 nights in a row. And I got to tell you, man, and I think this is because of our gray hair and our gray beard, but man, is it hard to work from 9 p.m. till 2 in the morning, 5 nights in a row.
Yeah. Well, especially if you got a day job going on too, right?
I know, man.
Yeah.
Well, I kept telling myself I wouldn't work during the day, but it doesn't work out that way.
Right.
So that's great. So excellent. So I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about the great work you've done with security and safety. But then I want to ask about how they fit in and why does the viewer have them in there like that, and kind of that confusion it's been tough in the classes to tell people, hey, here's your scope, but security and safety, and there's this and that, but this. And I think if people are more experienced with CMMI, that's an easy conversation. But for the newbies, it really throws them. So why don't we start with just telling us what's going on with that, and then can we get into what's the plan with the viewer and how they're going to be included in appraisals and things like that.
Sure. So first and foremost, we've got the new capability area, right? So it's 3 new practice areas. Managing security and safety is the capability area name. Then we've got enabling security, enabling safety, and managing security threats and vulnerabilities. So those are now in the model. and they're out there with one intent and one intent only at this part, and that is giving people a chance to start to learn what's in there.
Okay.
So we're not accepting security and safety appraisals at this point in time. The MDD update that we did in February actually has references to security and safety contained in it. And in there, like what we're doing with the model viewers, we're doing something kind of radical. We're actually letting the person using the model or the method figure out what applies. And from that perspective, think of it this way. If you want to simplify it down, and I think your point, Jeff, for the newbies, the 3 domains that were there, they're still there. You still have CMMI for development. It's got core in the 2 practice areas. You've got CMMI for services, and you got CMMI supplier management. What we're trying to do, which was the original vision of version 2.0, is make it so the maturity levels, which we predefine based on industry feedback, is what's the group of things that need to go together in maturity level 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're trying to orient people more towards stop thinking in maturity level language and start thinking in how do I want to improve my organization?
Value, yeah.
And from that perspective, you get to pick and choose whatever you want. If you wanted to do maturity level 3 for development and tack on a capability level for MST and an ESAC, you could do that today. Well, you couldn't do it today because we're not accepting appraisals, but you can do it as soon as we start accepting appraisals. So let me clarify that. Whenever we release new content in the CMMI, especially these last several years of 2.0, a lot of it's coming out much more rapidly than it did in the past. And that was one of our promises, right? We wanted to make sure that the model kept up to date with technology, et cetera, et cetera. So, but we also need to leave as much as we can stable for those organizations who are adopting it. So we also made a commitment to try to minimize how many practices we're going to change, or the practices themselves and so forth. But we always committed to adding new content and then allowing the community and the industry as they're adopting it to tell us what needs to be included the next iteration. So for example, can you get a maturity level rating for CMMI for security? At this point, we don't have a maturity level for just CMMI security defined. If we were to define it, what it would likely look like is core plus the 2 security PAs, right?
Yeah.
And then you could get a maturity level. But are there organizations out there, think about this, are there organizations out there whose only focus is on security or only focuses on safety versus it's security and development, it's security and services, or it's security and supply chain? Yeah, there are companies who specialize in security, no doubt. But that's a small market. We're trying to look at the bigger picture.
Right, yeah.
So you can add those on.
Go ahead, sorry. Yeah.
You can add those on all day long. We are accepting pilots. We have our first potential pilot with security that's going to go on. Now, what I will tell you is we ran this by the architecture working group 2 weeks ago. So this is also brand new. First hear it here on Jeff's channel. We have to make it official. So again, don't quote me because the official language will be coming out. But we talked about, would we be able to allow people who wanted to go ahead and do a maturity level for dev and add security on during the pilot phase and still get a rating? If you remember back when we did pilots before, we said you can't get a rating yet because it's not stable enough. Right. Well, core is stable. Development, services, supplier management, all stable. We're just adding, if you're looking at just security, you're only adding 2 PAs. Is it reasonable to expect that a lead appraiser, an appraisal team, and an organization could come up to speed and implement processes and practices and performance results within 2 to 3 months? Sure, that's probably very doable for some organizations. Maybe for large organizations, not so much. It depends. So what we're going to do is we're going to probably have this pilot period open until CAS is ready. But during the pilot period, we will have basically the opportunity for anyone who wants to pilot it. We're not thinking it's going to be a lot, and we will limit pilots if we get a lot of people asking, because we don't want to manually process these pilots. We want to be able to just port it into CAS when it's ready to go. So we're going to be looking at a handful of pilots between now and when CAS is updated, which we're expecting it to be probably end of Q4, maybe more likely Q1, when CAS will be updated and we'll be able to officially start using CAS and reporting and submitting and doing all the usual stuff with the security or safety appraisal packed in. So again, just to recap, all the domains are still there. You can still use them all day long. But think about it this way. You have development or you have services, and we added this new EVSD practice on top of that. And they apply equally to both scenarios. If I'm doing remote workforce and development shop, that equally applies to how I'm doing services. Security and safety are kind of looked at the same way. So we redefined the term domain in the glossary. So everybody might want to go take a look at that in the glossary. And security, safety can be their own domains. So security could be its own domain, so that safety could be its own domain. So if you start thinking it from a what's the type of work going on, and then fit the CMMI to that, it should help hopefully your students kind of focus on that a little better. Everything else is just add on as you need.
That's great, because you were saying earlier about the Chinese software maturity model, and what is it that will help you compete with that? And I think this is it. I think the really turning this into a performance improvement model, like we've always said we needed to, and kind of eschewing the myopic focus on maturity levels. I'm waiting for the day when we can build your own model, where I can say, these are the things that are important for my company, and I want to get a rating in this, and there's some sort of mechanism. I'm sure it's going to be core plus certain things, or maybe some sort of, but I'm waiting for the day when we can say, here's what we want to get a rating on, and we say goodbye to just dev services and supplier management as a package.
Amen. Amen. I mean, look at the MDAP program. That's exactly what the FDA is doing. Yeah. They've got 11 PAs the first round, and they let the organizations pick and choose as they go for the second round for their appraisals. Yeah. The Air Force is entertaining something very similar. They're looking at doing something like this as well. And we've had a couple other organizations interested in it.
Yeah,
so
obviously,
to me, it's like,
you need a lot of tailoring guidelines around it to make it work and make it consistent. But I can't tell you how many clients I've done appraisals for that or say, I don't know why we have to do this practice area. It's not part of our business. We don't do this thing. Maybe they're a software testing company, right? And
it's a downfall of the maturity level definition, right?
Right. And because of contracting officers, they have to get the maturity level, right? They just can't get the capability level, which would be the obvious answer in that scenario, right? Right. But it's maybe part of it's educating the government too, and when they're going to use CMMI as a determinator, maybe they need to understand capability levels a little better.
We're working on that. I'm glad you brought that up, because someone had mentioned something I saw yesterday about, gee, I'd like to see Isaka and CMMI get re-engaged with the DoD. We are definitely staying engaged and trying to get. We're looking at potentially getting some of our CMMI courses in Defense Acquisition University. We've been working directly with some other stuff, including some of the feedback for some of the stuff that you guys have been seeing coming out, executive orders, those kinds of things. But we've definitely trying to push that forward. And I've been actually talking within Isaka about creating, I don't know, many of you may have been involved in this. I was involved directly many years ago, but the DoD funded through the SEI an acquisition manager's handbook for how do you build your RFPs and contract language around the CMMI correctly and stuff. The problem with that thing, it was 170 pages and not a single one of those acquisition officers read it. Right. And they had some courses on it, and the DoD told me this firsthand. They also took some blame for this because they let that team atrophy. They didn't know what to do with them, so they put them over. It was really an acquisition tech sort of evaluation group, and they put them over under the IT software team because they didn't know what to do with them, and then they eventually just went away. So we're working on trying to create a very easy how-to guide for acquisition officers on, all right, here's how to write proper language for CMMI. Here's what you can do. Here's what you can get out of it. When you're looking for certain things, these are the things we'd recommend you do. And that might include not doing maturity levels. It might say, if you've got areas of focus, then ask for capability levels in this area, this area, this area.
Yeah, so I would love to see that. That would be terrific.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely want to have people help us review it and stuff. So stay tuned for more on that. We've got that in our queue.
Happy to help out. And as you know, I've been spending a little time with the DoD this year.
Yes, you have.
Last 2 years. And I understand that things don't move as quickly as one might hope. So hopefully I think we'll start to see this pretty soon, because I think that's a great solution to some of the problems we're having.
We're also getting, we have a direct connection with several people in the DoD who are calling us about information to clarify stuff on PARs. So we're putting out some updates to the PARs website based directly on their feedback.
Right.
So, you know, that's good news too, that they're actually engaging with us on that.
Well, it sounds like things are moving and shaking at Isaka, and you know, it was a little bit unsure what was going to happen for a while, but it sounds like you've taken the bull by the horns and you're getting stuff done.
Well, that's what they put me in this role for. So I'm not one to shirk responsibility. So I jumped in, and I got to tell you, it's not just me. It's got once that the team and the whole, when I say team, I'm talking about the entire program team, anyone in Isaka who touches CMMI, when they see that I'm actually serious about, by the way, we're going to use the CMMI to improve the CMMI. So guess what we did? We've got process inventories going on right now. We're doing departmental gap and assessments. We've got estimating worksheets now. I mean, you wouldn't notice it from the outside right now because you guys aren't going to see the benefit of it right away, but I'm already seeing the internal benefit of it. So,
yeah, go figure, man. Who would have thought that?
Right.
Anyway, Ron, thanks a lot, man. I'll chat with you after the close, but really good to have you. You're always chock full of great information and answering a lot of the important questions about CMMI. So I appreciate having you on.
Thanks for all your help with adoption and everything else, Jeff.
My
Talk to you
pleasure.
soon.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.